All right. I think we are live. We haven't done this in a while. That is a live Q&A. And it's almost accidental that we're doing it. This morning we had a confusion in the schedule. Um, and I showed up at 10:30 at the Q&A, but it was set for 11. So then I was panicking and I was like, what do we do? What's going on? How can I fix this? And so Lisa and I decided that we're just gonna do a public Q&A. And so welcome everyone. I do this Q&A every month, for patrons. And so this is a very exceptional time. So we'll see how it goes. We actually stopped doing the Q&As live because, things would get a little wild. So let's see how it goes. It's going to be a lot of fun. And so the way this works is patrons who support me at $10 or more, they get to ask questions in advance. And so they put the questions in our circle community. So I'm going to go through those questions, but I will also be paying attention to the chat. And once in a while, I will also answer questions in the chat. And so now, because it's public, we'll see, I won't answer all the questions. I won't answer the crazy questions. So yeah, please make your questions reasonable. All right, so it is December. Christmas is coming. I hope all of you are ready. Hope you've decorated your Christmas tree. Made your Christmas cookies. We haven't made our Christmas cookies yet, but slowly getting prepared. My children are older now, and for the past 2 years now, I've had that experience of my children coming back home for Christmas. And so it's obviously it's bittersweet because we miss them very much, but definitely looking forward to being together in the next few days. All right, and so I'm going to start with questions in the Circle community. Usually the way it works too is that patrons can go in and vote for their favorite questions so that I kind of know which one to answer, because I usually don't get through all the questions. There are usually too many questions. All right, we start with a doozy of a question. So Joel Kim asks, what is the worm, scarlet stuff, that eats the tree in the story of Jonah? What does it symbolize? When Jonah says it would be better if he was dead, is he angry that God didn't bring down fire on the repentant Nineveh people, or is he mad he didn't get the crown of martyrdom and got a mere sunburned crown on his head instead, or for some other reasons? And so the worm, the scarlet stuff, is actually one of the most it is a very difficult symbol in scripture. It is one which I've been meditating on for a long time. I know my brother has also been meditating on it for a long time, because it's not related only to the scarlet worm. The scarlet worm is also related to the scarlet thread that you find in scripture. There are several examples of this scarlet thread. One is when I forget, her name escapes me, the prostitute in Jericho. What's her name? Come on, I can't believe I don't remember her name. The prostitute in Jericho, she puts a scarlet thread from her window so that the Israelites know not to kill her family, and also protect Rahab. Thank you in the chat. It's insane we don't remember a name as important as Rahab. And so this is an example of a scarlet thread. There's another example which is even more obscure, which is that Tamar, when she gives birth to her children from Judah, the one of the child puts their hands out of the womb, and the woman helping her give birth ties a scarlet ribbon around his hand, and then to say he's the firstborn. But then ultimately the other child is the one that comes out first. And so this is, all of these images have to do with the scarlet worm or the scarlet thread. Of course, in the story of Jonah, the scarlet worm is related to the serpent in the garden. And so it has to do with change. It has to do also with a kind of a change, you could say, like how it's the change from the firstborn to the secondborn. It has to do with that. And that's related, of course, to the story of Jonah, because in the story of Jonah, what happens is that the enemies of Israel are saved. The Assyrians are not friends of Israel. Nineveh was the enemy of Israel, and therefore Nineveh is saved. And this is, of course, related, you could say, to the prostitute that is saved as the city is being destroyed. It's related, of course, to the inversion between the firstborn and the secondborn. It's related, to the fall, but also how the fall can become a redemption, to the relationship between the serpent in the garden and the bronze serpent. This is what's going on in that story. Now we can interpret it more precisely in terms of Jonah. Like I said, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult symbolism. I can kind of see the relationships, and I can intuit some of the aspects, but I never obviously would have talked about this without a question, because as you can tell, I'm still playing, trying to figure out how all of these things are connected. I can kind of see it, but it's difficult to put it into words. In the story of Jonah, for sure, what's important about that story in relationship to that is that Jonah is really a comedy. You can't get around that in fact Jonah is in some ways going back into the Garden of Eden. And so you can see it in the steps. He starts in the sea, if you think of the whole world as a mountain, the way I talk about it, he starts in the sea, gets eaten by the Leviathan, the monster of the deep, and then ultimately he goes up into the city, which is the first thing after the fall that Cain builds. It's like the Tower of Babel. You could also imagine it. But then he basically moves beyond the city and then goes out into the outside. And when he goes outside, he's standing in the sun and the wind. And you really have to understand it like he's standing in the light and the spirit. But he can't stand it. He can't stand being in the light and the spirit. And so God makes a garden for him, makes this tree for him. But then the tree gets eaten by the snake, gets eaten by the serpent. And so there's a funny thing. It's like, so Jonah basically wants to die. Like he's in the Garden of Eden, but he can't stand it. He wants to get the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, in the sense that he wants to die. So it's a funny thing. And so in that story, then you see that it is the red thread, or the serpent, that eats the vine, that eats the tree that covers. So it is related to change. It's related also to kind of how worlds move into each other. So that's what that's about. But it's very difficult symbolism. All right. Someone says blue thread sealed, red thread tampered or opened. Yeah, infiltration, someone says, that's in the chat. That's right, it has to do with infiltration. But infiltration is not necessarily bad. Sometimes it can be good, sometimes it can be bad. It has to do in some ways with the idea of that which doesn't fit, which in some ways leads to the change. It has to do with the change in order. It's a good way of thinking about that when you see the relationship between Tamar's children. But it's very, like I said, it's quite it's quite a deep symbolism, something to definitely meditate on. All right, so let's see. In the chat, someone asked it's DCCOPI asked, which philosopher or school of philosophy challenged you the most? I think that it's actually the postmoderns that challenged me the most, in the sense that when I was a student, coming from a kind of more fundamentalist type Christian upbringing, I was not ready for what I was going to encounter, and I wasn't ready for the types of arguments that I found, especially in Jacques Derrida, but then also to some extent, Lyotard and also some of the kind of, you could say, earlier philosophers that were dealing with questions of meaning. Yes, I would say, because they had a point. It's not just related to the red thread. It's related to the problem of infiltration and the problem of the parasite and the problem of how change happens. So, but ultimately, I think that I've integrated some of the best aspects of their ideas. When I talk about St. Christopher, when I talk about the Margins, we talk about Carnival, all of these things are a way to, in some ways, reintegrate some of the postmodern thinking, but put it in its proper place, and understand that it has to kind of ultimately serve a higher goal rather than just be an agent of chaos and an agent of deconstruction. It can be a little agent of chaos, kind of, at the edge of the world, but you can't let it eat the world. All right, and so let's see. Next question in the circle community. So Jason Rickards asked, a priest is like a stand-in for Christ. When you kiss his hand, you are kissing Christ's hands. Is Santa Claus at the mall like the priest of the spirit of Santa Claus? Also, could you say that Santa Claus didn't really exist before St. Nicholas? Yeah. So it's so funny because I actually just recorded a video, which should come out before Christmas, because so many people are asking me, well, isn't Santa Claus just St. Nicholas, or is Santa Claus not St. Nicholas? And so you have to watch the video to kind of get my sense of what that is. But in terms of the idea of how the Santa Claus in the mall participates in the existence of Santa Claus, yes, that I think that's obviously, people might find it sacrilegious, but no, it's not sacrilegious. It's how hierarchy functions. It's how lower aspects of a hierarchy that embody the higher principles, how they represent the higher principles. It's like when you have when you have a corporal in the army, or you have some lower level in the army, when he's giving you the order, that order is a representation of what the general said at the level of where he is. And so he's adapting the order of the general down to the level of the men. And that is in some ways what the mall Santa is doing. The mall Santa has to enact Santa in this particular situation. And if he doesn't, then he's not Santa. If he acts off character, if he's acting in a way that is lacks respect for what Santa we all know he is, then he's going to get called out. He's going to cause chaos. The parents are going to be annoyed with him, and if he says something off color or something rude, the parents will get annoyed with him. His boss at the mall will get annoyed with him, and so he in some ways has to enact this character at a local level. And so it is similar, you could say, into the way that a priest in some represents Christ to us at our level. So yeah, that is right. But obviously it's not the same, because obviously he's not representing Christ. He's representing Santa. All right, so Artifacts H2Y in the chat says, what do you think of the Pope saying about the Filioque? We must therefore leave behind theological controversies that have lost their raison d'etre, schism ending soon. I don't know if schism is ending soon. We'll see. It's obviously it's not up to us to decide that, and we have to be attentive to what's going on. My intuition is that the schism won't end before the eschaton, and that is also because of the decentered nature of the Orthodox Church, which is that although we have this idea that the patriarch could in some ways could bring about a return to communion, in practice that is not the case. And if the patriarch enacts a return to communion with the Catholic Church, then the other churches will simply disagree. There are many times in the history of the Orthodox Church where the patriarch was a heretic. It's not like we're not used to that. And so if the patriarch acts in a way that the church recognizes as being inappropriate, then they won't follow suit. Now, in terms of union of the churches, to be honest, I've said this before, I'm very suspicious of this motion, because the fact that the Catholic Church wants to unite with the Orthodox Church in the same moment when they are clamping down on their own traditional mass, and that they are in some ways insisting on the Novus Ordo, and trying to prevent, or to at least make the traditional mass as limited as possible. goes to show you what spirit animates it. And therefore, the interest in joining with Orthodoxy seems to be a kind of desire for a kind of global unity. It seems to be a kind of desire to be open, to be open to the outside and to kind of integrate all that which is outside. Like the desire to join with the Orthodox in this case might be the same as the Pope Francis's, embracing of the Pachamama and these kind of more suspicious elements that have integrated into the Catholic Church. And therefore, if that's the case, then we should be very cautious and very attentive because, once there is union with Rome, what is to say that then the Pope will not begin to clamp down on the Byzantine mass, the Byzantine liturgy in the way that he did in the past? And so obviously, I'm not the one to speak, but for this, I'm not one of those people that believes that there's no way in any way that we could ever be united with Rome. I believe that if the situation is right and the reasons are right and all of the elements are right, then I think that we should not shy away from that just because of resentment and because we're angry about the Fourth Crusade or whatever. But those have to be there, and they have to be real, and we have to be a little wise as serpents as we approach this. So yeah. So Gohar M asks the question: can you make any sense of Gen Alpha's obsession with 6-7? All right, I'm going to go really out on a limb here, and I'm going to do the thing that I tell all of you guys not to do when you do symbolism, but I'm going to do it just for a little bit of fun. It seems to me that this weird obsession with 6-7 and absurdist obsession with 6-7, it has to do obviously with absurdity. And it has to do with the change from 6 to 7. That is, the change from the day of work to the day of rest. The day of rest has also to do with death and the breakdown of natural causality. And so I think that this weird insight about this kind of weird confusion of of 6-7 and this ambivalence of one or the other and a kind of chaotic lack of mathematical logic seems to be what it is that's happening. In some ways, it's just an affirmation of absurdity, a movement of reason into absurdity. So yeah, so that's what I think. But who knows if that's right? All right, okay. All right, so let's see what we got here in the chat. So Fronema for Father says, can you please get Cormac Jones on your channel for a podcast? He's one of the most helpful voices in contemporary Orthodox thought, and he's so close to you already being the editor of the journal. I mean, sure, I'd be happy to have Cormac on. The sense I have of Cormac is that he doesn't necessarily want to come on. He's very kind of, I can ask him again, but he's a very kind of calm, thoughtful person. He doesn't look for attention. And so, I mean, I'd be happy to have him on if he wants to come on. My sense from him is that it's not something that he's actively pursuing. Let's just say it that way. But Cormac, if I'm wrong, please tell me, and we'll see. All right, let's see. All right, I'm going to go back into our community at this point here. All right, let's see. So Eric Solander asks, hi, Jonathan, hope all is well. Your brother has said that Christ is the key, but the lock is lost or forgotten. That really made sense to me, even if I don't understand it. If you know what I mean, could you expand on this concept and how is his search going? A world that isn't fallen doesn't need saving, you know. And so, I mean, I don't really want to speak for my brother. You know, I think that he has his own path that he's going on, and I think that it's very he he he's very demanding of himself, and he's very demanding of, you know, of the reasons why he does things. And so I think that that's in some ways what's motivating these types of statements is he can see in Christ something, but he feels like there are aspects of Christ that, because we've in some ways forgotten, many people have forgotten a lot of the Old Testament and the way that the Old Testament speaks about the world, that in some ways we for that reason we've lost some aspect of what Christ is and what Christ is doing. And possibly that's one of the reasons why we have moved towards a kind of secularism and a kind of moralistic Christianity and all of that, you know. And so I think his insight is good, and I think that it matches some of the insight that other people are having. If you look at, you know, people like Father Stephen DeYoung, of course, Michael Heiser, these kinds of people that are trying to recover, you could say, a cosmology into which we can better understand Christ's function, why Christ is what he is. These are similar questions. I think that Mathieu is really, apart from just cosmology, he's looking at it from all the levels, and from cosmology to just basic meaning making, you know, to all these structures. So yeah, so I wish him the best for sure on his quest and on his path. All right, so let's see. Jasmine Dwind, have you ever talked about the symbolism of sand? I find it interesting that it is the earth closest to water, and it's kind of has water-like properties. And so, yes, I mean, I think that the symbolism of sand, for me at least, is similar to the symbolism of dust in Scripture. That is, in some ways, what sand is a kind of chaos, because it's broken down things. You know, it's parts and bits of things. It's bits of rocks, bits of things from the ocean. You know, bits of shells, bits of coral that have been, you know, brought down to a point where they are not solid. You know. And so you see that in the story of Christ, when Christ talks about how you shouldn't build your house on the sand. He really, I think, is referring to this idea, which is that sand is chaotic. It is not. It is not solid. You know, whereas a mountain or a rock, you know, or a stone is in some ways relative to sand and to water. It is an image of heaven. You know, that's why you have all of these kind of ideas of, in a lot of traditions, of like the stone that comes from heaven, the heaven, you know, the heavenly stone. Because it is in some ways the highest part, if you think of the mountain especially. So I think that that's a good way of understanding it. So sand is an image of a lack of cohesion, of chaos and all that, and it's related to dust, which is why God gathers the dust together. So he gathers all this multiplicity, all this chaos, and he gathers it together, and then by putting spirit inside, he unites the dust into living flesh, you know, into living body. So. Let's see what we got here. Man, you guys are asking a lot of questions in the chat here. Um, Jonathan, I'm gonna get a personal one. Jonathan, any holiday plans that you're particularly looking forward to the season for symbolic reasons? I mean, I think that for symbolic reasons, I'm looking forward to having my family gather together. You know, that's the most symbolic part. And you know, and we have our own kind of rituals. We have our own participation. Um, you know, and you can see, if you're attentive, you can see it kind of follows a pattern. It's super interesting, actually. You know, hopefully this won't happen this year, but usually we get into a fight like like on the 24th during the day. We'll get into a fight, especially my wife and I, or there's tension with the kids and everything. and it seems like that. I always hoped that that wouldn't happen. For some reason, it just seems to be part of the pattern that there needs to be a kind of chaos or a kind of frenetic disjoining, which then moves into unity. And usually, by the time we're having Christmas dinner, it's a very beautiful, powerful time. Interesting question. Sam AH8 asked, was there a time, say when you were a teenager growing up in an evangelical setting, where you thought more literally or attempted to, even at the time, did you find that dissatisfying? Yeah, I would say that I did, obviously, because I kind of grew up in that world. And so I definitely thought that way. I was even a kind of a 6 day creationist back in the day, like in the sense of I mean, I guess I could say I'm still a 6 day creationist, but like in a scientific sense, like this kind of 6 day scientific creationism, which I'm not now for sure. Um, I still think that it's the best way of describing the creation, but it's not a like a scientific way. But yeah, I used to think that way, but I think that by the time I was like a late teenager, it was already kind of dissatisfying, and I was always someone who was trying to be honest. And so at some point I could tell when arguments were being twisted in order to justify a conclusion. And and that always made me uneasy for sure. I remember going to these like kind of creationist debates, and there were sometimes what I could tell that actually the evolutionists were twisting their arguments to get to their conclusion, but there are also moments when I was like, no, these guys, these creationists, they're not being honest. Like they're kind of twisting the facts, and I get very uneasy when I see that happening. Whether it's that's why in some ways I struggle to be a political partisan, because I see both sides, and then I see them kind of twisting facts and misrepresenting reality. Um, and so for that reason, I struggle to be fully on board. All right, okay. So Daniel Linton in the Circle community asks, can you share any insight into the stories of Rebecca in Genesis? She is my wife's patron saint, and we have her icon where she is holding a jar of water and a gold ring, and the writing on it says, Rebecca the righteous. It seems like the focus is on the story of her giving water to Isaac's servant and camels at the well, and not on her trickery with Jacob and Esau, which to me is more prominent story. Why this emphasis? Is there a connection between the two stories? That's super interesting. I've actually never thought about whether there's a connection between the two stories. For sure, I do think that in the story, that's Rebecca's kind of shining moment, is when she does that, and when she puts all that effort into serving Isaac's servant or whatever, and giving water. Um, and in that way, I think that that's what obviously is being said, that she's righteous. In the Bible, people have mentioned how Scripture is very subtle about the way that it talks about things, and there's a very weird aspect to Rebecca, which is that we never talk about her death. That her death doesn't appear in the story, and after the trickery, and after Jacob leaves, and when he comes back, we never hear about Rebecca again. And so I think a lot of people have interpreted that as a sense of disapproval of her actions. But the thing about Christianity, and the thing about saints, is that we also understand, that these characters in the Old Testament, that they were not perfect, that they had their sins, and they had their mistakes. But like you said, if we're going to portray her in an icon as a holy person, then we will make the element that is imitation of Christ, will make that shine, you know. And so, of course, you know that there's a relationship between Rebecca, you know, serving water and the woman at the well in the story of Christ. And, you know, many people have seen that relationship. And so I think that that is also why that particular image will be chosen, which is that Rebecca then becomes an image of the church, which is why the idea of the gold ring that is given to her, you know, as a sign of the wedding, you know, as a sign of the wedding feast, and that is an image, of course, of Christ marrying the church or marrying his bride. So, you know. Someone asked, what is the relation between Samson and King David? Yeah, there's definitely a relationship. I mean, King David is a very fascinating character, you know, because he pulls a lot of threads together in himself. You know, Samson, if you want to see the positive aspect of Samson, is that in some ways Samson is trying to integrate, you could say, the outer aspects. You know, he is in some ways there's an aspect of him that is in some ways a prophecy of Christ, which sounds weird when you think about it. But the idea of Samson finding honey in a dead lion, is very important. It's a very important image because the lion is impure, you know, is not kosher, and the dead lion is even less. Like, you know, a dead animal and a dead lion. The fact that he finds honey in a dead lion is an image of how he is able to, you could say that he is able to integrate that which is strange, or make it useful, find meaning in that which is strange. It's related to how Samson also takes the door of the city and carries it to the top of the hill. You know, how he takes the limit and he's able to connect it to the margin. It's all a little carnivalesque. It's all a little excessive. But David is like that, does a better job at this, you know, because David repents. So David marries a foreign woman in the sense that he takes a woman that is not his. He takes the wife, which is an image, you could say, of the dead lion, right? He joins himself with the strange woman whose lips are sweet as honey, but whose feet go down into death, right? That is also a weird image of, you could say, the honey in the dead lion. But what he does is that he repents of his action, and therefore out of that comes Solomon, you know. And so Solomon comes out of that union, even though it is illicit and it is a kind of and so yeah, so these are a few meditations on that. So Michael Cascio, Michael Cascio asks, what are your thoughts on Harry Potter? Many point to Christian themes and patterns, yet it's embodied in an occult setting. I mean, it's interesting. Like, you know, my wife really didn't want Harry Potter to be part of our life. And so my children never read Harry Potter, never watched the movies. I'm kind of less bothered by Harry Potter in the sense that, you know, the tradition of magic is one which exists in the West. You know, it's part of C.S. Lewis, it's part of J.R. Tolkien. You know, that there is a kind of tradition of natural magic that exists in the West, and that Western people in the past have not seen it as all evil. That the idea that you can, in some ways, affect the world if you do it for good. You obviously have to be cautious about this stuff, but so, and it's also done in a kind of fantastical way. So I'm not bothered that much by the setting and by all of that. In some ways, you could understand the story of Harry Potter as children that are learning to master powerful skills and have to discipline themselves and learn to deal with that. Um, but the biggest problem I have with Harry Potter is, in some ways, the character of Harry Potter is, there's a weird aspect of him, which is that this kind of golden boy aspect of him. How he comes to the school and is immediately the best, and there's like a Mary Sue element to Harry Potter that I find a little difficult, maybe more difficult than other aspects, and because of the kind of Mary Sue Harry Potter, the like, you're special, and you're the special one, and everybody celebrates you and everybody wants to know you. I'm not surprised that has led, in some ways, the surprise that it fostered, you could say, kind of LGBTQ culture. And even though, the author has reacted against the excesses of that, I think that there's some reality to the connection between this type of Mary Sue, special one, and that culture. So that's what I think. But So several accounts are pushing that I'm visiting Ethiopia. I am not visiting Ethiopia, and I am actually going to record a message for the Ethiopian Christmas. But this year I'm not going. I will be there next year. That's the plan. The plan is that I will go next year. This year everything happened a little too late. And so please stop pushing that stuff in the chat. I've heard that many people are pushing this stuff in the chat. So Giovanni Martello 1678 says, do you have any recommendations on reading about the symbolic way of thinking applied to the natural sciences? And yes, I do. We have actually published a small book, which is called Post-Reductionist Christianity by J.P. Marceau. And so that is, I think, the best book, because he really talks about the end of reductionism in science and the end of reductionism in philosophy. And it's a very slim book. It's very easy to read. You should check it out. And I think we actually have copies, because we had sold out for a while, but we have copies of it on the yeah. Aram Potential says, JP's book is incredible. I've given away a lot of copies. I've had people tell me that it's like Mere Christianity for the 21st century, which is definitely high praise. All right, so please ask only one question in the circle community, because that's the idea. Is like everybody gets to ask one question. So pick your question well. Joseph Svenningson asked a great question. Why are the Avatar movies so forgettable? They are some of the highest grossing movies in history, yet no one talks about them, and they don't leave a cultural impact. Yes, that is very fascinating. I think that it has to do with the reason why they're so high grossing is because people go to see them for a spectacle. That they go to see them, because of the special effects, because of it's like watching watching fireworks. I mean, I love watching fireworks, but I don't remember them afterwards. It's like a little blip, like a little moment of rest and of just let yourself go, kind of like Yeah, so I think that that's what it is. You know, the stories in them are, they're just not interesting. Like the characters are not interesting. The tropes are rather thin, and the story is in some ways, there's also a performative contradiction in the Avatar movies, which is that James Cameron fetishizes nature, you know, fetishizes the kind of noble savage, and so Avatar is clearly a kind of noble savage image, people that live in nature, that do all of this stuff, but then. And then the technocrats, you know, these evil humans, and the humans are evil, obviously, come and they want to take over, they want to invade, they want to do all this stuff. And so already we have a problem, which is that, making a whole series of movies where humans are the bad guys and the aliens are the good guys, first of all, that's a problem. Making a movie where civilization is evil and it's represented with you, and then the stranger is represented with nature and of all of that, but that's good, and that's the thing we need to protect. That's also a problem, but it becomes even more of a problem when you make it into the most high-tech movie ever made, like the most kind of AI, CGI, artificial technical thing ever created. And so you do that, but then the whole story contradicts the very existence of the movie. I think that for all those reasons, these movies just don't have a hook. Like they don't have anything to hook into us. So you don't really care. Yeah, that's right. So. So Piotr 2190 says, I believe in Christ's real resurrection, but does tradition affirm that I, as the same conscious person, will awaken embodied and transformed, able to recognize and be united with others? And so, I mean, yes, of course, it will be you. There's no doubt, that it will. There's no reason why it would be that in the resurrection that you would be anybody else. Like I don't even know what resurrection would mean if it's not you. Um, and so, the way of understanding it is that it will, in the resurrection, there'll be a kind of, a good way of understanding the resurrection, because it's difficult to think about this, because obviously, the resurrected body is not one that exists in chronological time in the same way that we understand chronological time now. It's not that it's completely atemporal, but that the aspect of its existence is, when we talk about eternal life, we don't mean that it will just kind of, that it'll be like billions and billions of years that you'll exist in this, like this resurrected body for just billions of years. You just get bored. You just kind of continue to exist. It's rather a kind of notion of fullness. That is, it's the totality and the fullness of you that is being manifested in bodily form. And so it's mysterious. Obviously, we don't completely understand it, but the best way of understanding it is in some ways that it is the fullest version of you that you can fathom. And therefore, that's why there's a sense in which in the resurrection, the thing that that you have let build you, that you have participated in building in your life, that is your thoughts, your memories, your sins, your virtues, all of these things will be accentuated and will kind of be made fuller in the resurrection. And that's why there's a sense in which, that's why in the sense in which you have to kind of build your resurrected body now. That sounds weird to say it that way. Please don't understand it in a kind of very gross sense. But in some ways, that your resurrected body will be made out of your out of your glory. Think about it that way. Maybe that's a good way to think about it, you know. So so Radu Bompa says, what is the symbolism of interference? It is a phenomena found in physics, radio waves, quantum mechanics, but also in day-to-day life. My thoughts are that it is related to competing purposes, a telos that is very close to another but different in the end. And so, yes, that is a very good insight. Interference is related to the relationship between a coherent body to the things that are not aligned with it, you know. And so you could understand interference as a kind of resistance. So you could say, you know, you if you think of you know, you could think of a let's say I don't know, like a sled going down a hill of snow, and then there are rocks on the ground, and the rocks will interfere with what you want the sled to be doing, what the sled is made to do. And so that is like a kind of passive interference that is in some ways the telos of something rubbing up against things that are not part of its telos. But then you can also have more active interference, which then becomes, like you said, more like competing purposes that are encountering each other, you know. And so sorry, you know, and so if I'm trying to go to the well to get water, but someone wants the water and doesn't want me to have it, then they will try to interfere. They'll get in my way. They'll do all kinds of things to prevent me from doing the thing that I'm doing, because, like you said, there are there's different competing telos that are competing with each other. And so, yeah, hopefully that makes sense to you. And then let's just say the last one, which is there's the more subversive interference, which is something like infiltration, you know. And so that's the most subtle one. It's the one that's relevant today. It's actually quite relevant now, is that there's a type of interference which is direct with your telos and is in some ways, you know, two people that encounter each other on the street and fight. There's a passive interference, which is in some ways the resistance of the world that is in the way of what it is you want to do. But then there's also the harshest interference is something like betrayal or something like infiltration, where people with the different telos will actually secretly act against you, you know, without you knowing until it's too late. Checks 1007 says, would you consider giving Jung a second chance read? I mean, maybe. There's a lot of things to do in life. I still have. Jordan Peterson sent me a Jung book, and I started it, and I got very frustrated as soon as I saw that he talked about evil as an existing thing. You know, and so a few things I thought were kind of, but yeah, sure. I mean, obviously Jung isn't completely wrong. Just that I found other people that seemed to me like they had a better understanding. So all right, so Ariel Schlasiak says, our inner children live inside our body, created often by lack of care in early childhood, screaming for our attention as a result of traumatic experience. Where one can find deeper explanation and a story in a Christian tradition Bible, is Christ talking about our broken inner children like part of our body, soul, and that we need to love and take care of? How one can deal with that? No, I mean, this whole like inner child thing, I mean, it's very contemporary psychology, not just contemporary, but like, I mean, it's really like post 1960s kind of psychology. And I think there are some difficulties in that. It's not like it's completely illegitimate, but I think there are difficulties in that there is a sense in which we understand ourselves uh, as being um, as being only traumatized by external experiences. That is, we understand the role of society, of our parents, and people that act on us as the cause of our lack, and so therefore we portray ourselves as victims, and we see the outside world as being an assault on the purity of myself, and so this idea of the kind of this pure inner child that exists in you that would like to be free from all of these attacks that come from the outside. I believe that it is a very it I believe that it's a dangerous way of thinking. I think that it is it's a way of thinking that can lead to narcissism, and can lead to a kind of selfish way of seeing the world. That is not the way that Christianity teaches about who you are. We are meant to see the reality of our existence as a communion with others, not as this isolated thing that has to be protected from others. And to the extent, of course, that we are hurt and that we are damaged by our relationship with others, we are called to forgive, and to return into communion. And it is actually not by loving yourself in the way that the kind of post 1960s psychologist would advocate that you come into the fullness of yourself. That it is actually through forgiving and loving others that you come to be the truest version of yourself. And it's a difficult road. It goes against the grain of so much of what we think. And I'm not saying that I'm able to do that. I've been in some ways infected with this type of vision of myself as the victim and how everybody is acting on me. And I working in my own life to try to not let myself be convinced by those types of arguments, because the truth is that there's no way out in that direction, because once what happens when you start to love your inner child and you start to protect it and you start to care for it, and then what happens the next time someone hurts you, what happens the next time someone betrays you, what happens when the other people rub up against that inner child again. It's like, are you going to cut yourself off? Are you going to protect your inner child from others? All that type of stuff. That is not, sadly, that is not Christian. That's not Christian. I don't think that's a Christian way of doing it. So Lisa tells me that she has open super chats. Oh my goodness! And so we've never done this before. So if you want to do super chats, you can. No guarantee that I will answer the question, right? No guarantee that I will answer the question, but obviously it's easier to pay attention to the things that appear at the top of the screen. All right, let's keep going here. So Checks 1007 asked me, are you going to be doing more courses on Peterson Academy? Hope to see more. I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I think probably not. It's also in part because we started our own kind of online courses for Symbolic World. And, when I do it for that platform, in some ways, we're building everything up. It builds the company. I've told people before, maybe you haven't, maybe I haven't said it in public, but when people take courses on the Symbolic World, one of the things they're doing is that they're funding the Symbolic World Press, because we realize as we're developing the Symbolic World Press that you need massive amounts of capital in order to have a press, because you have to print, you always have to have thousands of copies of your book available, at every moment, and that you realize that requires a lot of money. And so instead of borrowing from the outside, because we want to be free and we want to be able to do things the way we want to do them, that's one of the things that the courses are doing, is that in some ways the money that's generated from the courses, first of all, we really pay our teachers really well on the courses, much better than most of the online course systems. But then also we use that money to basically print books, and so that's why, in some ways, I'm going to focus mostly on that type of stuff. All right. All right, so Joshua Paniker says in the Circle community, asks, what is the best way to understand our calling to perfection? Christ says, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. I was recently asked if we should believe we can become perfect, and it's difficult to answer. And I guess I'm unsure exactly what it means. When you say the saints attain perfection on earth to the capacity that they were able, is this essential to asceticism and salvation? And so, yes, that is right. St. Maximus talks about theosis and about perfection, and he always says, to the extent that you're capable. And he leaves that vague in some ways because it is not clear to what extent we're called to be divinized, to what extent we're called to be united with God. But to the extent that it's possible, that is what we should be aiming for. That is what we should be desiring. And therefore, I think that we have to take Christ's calling very seriously, that he is calling us to be perfect. He is calling us to be sinless. He is calling us to be united with him, as much as that's possible. And it's hard to know what the limit of that is. But when you read some of the writings of the saints and of the ascetics, you get a sense that it's pretty high. All right, and so we have our first super chat. Let's see how this goes. So, and it's a good one. 12 Gates podcast asks, why do Moses and Elijah appear with Christ at the transfiguration? Why did Elijah ascend and Moses didn't? Now, this is, of course, the question. Now, at least in the book of Jude, we get a sense that Moses' body might have been taken up by St. Michael after his death, but that his body would have been taken up. And so there's a relationship, of course, between Elijah and Moses, as in that sense that they are both described, of course, not in the Old Testament, but at least in the New Testament, they're both known to have their body having been going up. Now, why do they appear? They appear in some ways as two aspects of the tradition, that Moses appears as the law in this context, and of course Elijah appears as the prophet. Elijah, you can see them as opposites. In some ways, you could say that Moses is there at the beginning of the covenant and is there to represent, the law that comes down from heaven and is uniting the people. Elijah appears at the end, you could say, of the covenant, in the sense that he appears as the moment when the northern kingdom is falling apart. When the enemies, when Jezebel, the foreign queen, has taken over and is killing the prophets of God, and he brings fire, right? He brings God's fire down into the world. And so, and it's fractal, because you see in the story of Moses, there's already the fire that appears, on the fringe of the camp. And so it's not like it's just one or the other, but if you look at them together and you see them, and if you look at, Elijah is a kind of St. John the Baptist figure. He is wild. He's also called the Thisbit, which means he's called the stranger himself. And so these are the two kind of elements. And so you can kind of see them as right hand, left hand symbolism in the transfiguration. And so to me, that is really the way of understanding it, is all of those elements together are related to why it is that they appear appear at the transfiguration. All right, so let's see. We've got Travers Shersky. These are hard to read names. What advice do you have for demoniacs, ritual abuse victims? Is there anything wrong with praying in our own words to God as long as we maintain a prayer rule? What advice do I have for demoniacs? I would say go to a priest. Go to a priest, go to a bishop, and tell them your story, and then hopefully they can pray for you, and they can, if you need exorcism, they can perform the exorcism. You can't really, with great difficulty, you can do this on your own. If you are experiencing something that you think is some kind of demon possession, first of all, maybe it's not. And so you need discernment, and that discernment has to come from other people. So yeah. So Nolan 824, 4 years ago, I watched Pentecost for the zombie apocalypse, and I've been attending church for over a year. A month ago, my daughter and I were baptized into the Orthodox Church. Thank you. Any advice for a girl dad? That's awesome. Congratulations, man. That's wonderful. I mean, love your daughters. The love of a daughter is beyond description. It's really amazing. I didn't have sisters when I was young, but I have two daughters, and the love and affection, of a daughter is something very precious that you should definitely hold on to. All right. So Anthony B in the circle asked, "What is the symbolism of school shootings, or rather?" That they are contingency now regularly prepared for, e.g. special locks on doors, window shades, and even bulletproof shade rooms. What does this say about the modern institution of education? And so this school shootings are a very particular thing in the U.S. They clearly are a sign of deep malaise in the United States. In some ways, it seems to be people that are alone and alienated and are wanting to do a type of damage which is the most damaging possible, right? But killing children is the most traumatic thing, because everybody sees the death of a child as a scandal, and so to kind of enact that is of course one of the biggest horrors, and so. I think that it is definitely a very odd phenomena of U.S. politics. Yeah. So Two More V's asks, are there any updates on the front of the Symbolic World Summit, a timeline for when to expect a certain announcement, etc.? Merry Christmas. And so maybe I should announce it now. I mean, should I? I'm thinking my team's going to be annoyed with me, but I'm just going to do it. Yes, we do have dates for the next Symbolic World Summit. And the dates for the next Symbolic World Summit are going to be the week of the 13th, the May 14th to the 16th are the exact dates of the next Symbolic World Summit. We're going to do it in Ohio. We already have the place. We're doing it in Ohio because it's kind of more in the middle of the United States, and also because it's less expensive. We can get what we need, and we're going to have a space that will be connected to a church, and so people who do want to go to church services can. Those that don't want to don't have to. And so yes, that is when it's going to be. It's going to be in Broadview Heights, Ohio. And so come, I can't wait. I'm excited. I was traumatized by the last one because we had all these difficulties with getting it to happen. But now I'm excited, because I have a great team. We have people on our team. We have Deacon Seraphin, we have Morgan, we have Lisa, we have Ray. We have so many amazing people on our team that I know that can make it happen in the best way. So I am definitely excited. And so pay attention, because we're going to soon put things up for tickets and all that. And we have already some amazing speakers that have been confirmed, but I don't want to announce those yet. But you'll be surprised, because they are speakers that come from very different walks, very different aspects of the symbolic world, you could say. And I can't wait for you guys to see it. So I'm looking forward to it. All right, so Giant Fairy Bouillon. Imagine you crazy names on YouTube. Is time space the same as Earth, heaven, or periphery, center? Are they meant to be understood completely different? I mean, I think you really have to, in some ways, Matsir and I, we don't use the same exact categories in order to talk about very similar things. And so I think you really have to kind of, to read Matthew's book attentively. I think he gives you enough in there to understand it. Um, and so it is in some ways. I mean, it is related. It is related, but it's not. I don't think it's exactly the same. So hopefully that helps. But I would say, yeah, pay attention to the book. So all right, let's go back. I'm gonna go back here into my. Now I was in my calendar, like reading, looking at dates. All right. So people need to post just one question in the Q&A here. All right. So Julian Henry asks, hello, Jonathan. Sorry, this is a repeat question. Why was the Tone 5 Pascha Stikera Let God Arise melody chosen for your video theme? I noticed the number of eighth note is clearly different. A hidden message, perhaps. I only recently noticed it, and it is great. And so, yes. So the reason why I chose it was, in fact, I did want that to be chosen. I had at first chosen Rimsky-Korsakov's symphonic version, that beautiful version that he writes, where you have this kind of you have these horns that go, and you get this kind of sense of the resurrection. So that's what I had at the beginning. I like the idea that in some ways there was this sense of God coming back into the world, and this image of the resurrection. But I wanted it, of course, to be subtle in terms of suggesting that I did believe in that we were encountering a kind of return of Christianity, a resurrection of the Logos. One of my very first talks that I gave in public was called that, resurrection of the Logos, that this return of meaning, this return of enchantment that was happening, that I could see kind of, you could say, sparkling even in 2016. So that's how it started. But then I kept getting copyright. I kept getting copyright attacks, and so at some point I was getting demonetized and all this stuff, because I had chosen a very old recording of Rimsky-Korsakov, but it seems like that wasn't good enough. And so my friend Matt Wilkinson, that I've been on his podcast before, I was on his podcast recently with Andrew Gould. He reached out to me and he said, "Look, man, if you want, I'd be willing to record a version, that would be piano and strings." And so that's what we did. So he re-recorded it for me. He also recorded an outro, which we don't use for some reason. We should probably use it. He also recorded an outro that had that had a kind of more improvisational feel to it. So that's why I chose it. But I do believe that for me it was mostly the idea that we were seeing a new day, because when you listen to the Rimsky-Korsakov version, you get the feeling like it's in the morning, and where like the sun is coming up, and you get this sense of a new day, of a new beginning, of a new start, which is of course the resurrection of Christ, but also just a new beginning. So that's what I wanted. I'm happy you noticed that. And some people probably haven't noticed that yet. So Gomez7 asks, why have you considered some of the reasons why people have trouble getting the symbolic worldview? Do you think this is the result of nominalism? I mean, yeah, it's the result of materialism. It's the result of the kind of end of nominalism. But I think it's going to be less and less the case. I do believe that as time moves forward, people that have some version of a kind of re-enchanted worldview are going to dominate. And you can see it happening. That's why I interviewed Michael Levin. That's why I just interviewed Ian McGilchrist. These people, John Vervaeke, all these people that aren't Christians, that are still kind of seeing what we could call vertical causality, or seeing how, the best way to understand the world is that there are intelligences, or that there are these wills that act upon us. Yeah, and so I think it's just a question of time. I do believe, and this might be, this is very arrogant of me to say this, but I do think that we're definitely ahead of the curve, and that at some point, even without knowing, this type of thinking will become normal. Like, will become the basic thinking. That's what I think. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But it seems like things are going in that direction. So maybe you disagree with me, but so Justy Anderson in the Circle community asked, what do you think of the idea that each kind of land animal corresponds to a realm formed on day 3? Dry ground appears the realm of creeping things. Plants makes open fields emerge, the realm of domestic animals. And trees make forests rise, the realm of wild beasts. Creeping things belong to soil and stones. Domestic animals to fields and cultivated growth, and wild beasts to the forest among the trees. Yeah, man, that's interesting. I never thought about it. It's an interesting insight. Yeah, it's an interesting insight. I would have to think about it a little more. For sure, the 3 types of animals are definitely related to meaning, right? Related to meaning, it's related to man, right, in the sense that the tame animals are the ones that are closest to us, because they're like extensions of our will in some ways. They manifest more clearly than naming, right? The sense that they've been named by humans, they've been tamed. And then you also have the wild animals, which are the ones that are dangerous to you, the ones that you don't control, the ones that you don't necessarily have power over, and then ultimately the creepy crawlers, which are the ones that are going to eat you, that are basically going to decompose you. Yeah, but yeah, there's an interesting insight there that you got. All right, let's see. So Carl Christian Roberts 6886, greeting from Cape Town, South Africa. Is there a relation between the Grim Reaper and Christ? They both wield a sickle. Revelation 14. And so the Grim Reaper, the reason why the Grim Reaper has a sickle is very old. It's a very, very old symbolism. It is, of course, related to Saturn, and it's related to the some people would say confusion. But I don't think it's a confusion. I think that it's a kind of symbolic assimilation. The confusion between Chronos in the Greek sense, that is Saturn, and then Chronos in the sense of time, that is Father Time. The Reaper, the one that in some ways comes at the end and calculates and gathers the fruit. That brings about the end. And so there is a relationship, in some ways, because Christ contains all of these symbols together. And this is something that's difficult sometimes for people to understand, is that, you could say that one of the ways that I've said it before, and hopefully this won't get clipped in a very disturbing way, but, Christ contains the symbolism of Lucifer. Christ contains the symbolism of the Satan, but he is more than that, right? In some ways, the symbolism of Lucifer, the reason why it's evil is because it's self-contained and it's prideful, and it kind of tries to be itself. But the reason why Christ can act, you could say, as the Reaper, as the one that ends, and the one that gathers, the one that brings about the end, is because he's submitted to God, is because he himself was willing to die. And so there is definitely a relationship between all that imagery. But the Grim Reaper the kind of popular symbolism of it, and represents only the negative aspect of that, right? Represents only the one that the aspect of death that comes at the end and basically, chops off the thing, and and removes it from its source in order to make it into these fruits that are then gathered in. So hopefully that makes sense. That makes sense that Christ in some ways contains that symbolism, but he is not represented in the kind of skeletal remainder, kind of tragic figure that the Grim Reaper represents, but that in some ways there's also this idea that he is both. You could say that Christ is both the one that brings life and also judges life. And whereas the Grim Reaper is only the judge, is only the last part of that. So it's a limited aspect of symbolism, and Christ contains all of it together in himself. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So Michael Prislavsky in the Circle community asks, do you have some travel tips for Turkey, like how best to get from Istanbul to Cappadocia? I'm planning a family trip there. Other tips are welcome as well. Thank you for all your work, and past cheers to your wife and Deacon Seraphim. And so, as people know, it's funny because we asked this question about the Pope in the chat. We were actually supposed to go to the celebration of Nicaea. It was a weird thing for me. I'd been invited to participate in an American delegation to go to the event. And I was a little nervous because I was wondering how people would interpret that. All these people on the internet, they just interpret it in all their ways. But I was going to go anyways. I was invited, and I thought, I'm going to take this seriously. And so a few weeks before my understanding, this is what I was told, is that the Turkish government tried to limit or wanted to limit the amount of people that would go to the event. And therefore, we kind of got disinvited to the thing, but we already had tickets to Turkey, and I'd taken non-refundable tickets. So I told my wife, "All right, let's just go to Cappadocia. Let's just go." I've been wanting to go to Cappadocia forever, for like 25 years, and so it was everything I hoped for. It's beautiful. It's so amazing. Who needs Lord of the Rings when you have places like Cappadocia? Who needs fantasy? The things, the way that people live there, the mystery of the caves and the churches inside, all of that is more wonderful than any fantasy novel you could ever read. And so I was really impressed by that. As for advice, it obviously, if you want to go from Istanbul to Cappadocia, plan it in advance and get plane tickets. They're quite cheap. It's pretty far, and so it's better to just fly in. And I would say to get a place to stay in Göreme, in the caves, right? You have all these cave hotels. Don't get like the usual branded hotels. Go in the caves. Participate in that. Really, just be there inside. And then and then you don't totally need to go on tours. You can, but you don't totally need to go on tours. For a lot of the stuff, you can do it on your own and walk and go see the churches. That way you have time and you can kind of celebrate. But, it is bittersweet, It is bittersweet, to be honest. Because you go there and everything's abandoned, and you go there and, you go there and you feel like, this is something that was amazing and beautiful and magical, but then it's gone, and so that's how you feel in Turkey in general as a Christian, to be honest. And so, you have to be ready for that, We had this crazy thing, though, that happened to us in Istanbul. We went to see Hagia Sophia, obviously, and they're doing major reparations on the church, and so there's a huge scaffolding inside the church. And I realized that this trip, I should have known this before, but I realized on this trip more fully that, the church, Hagia Sophia is all painted, right? So obviously the Muslims at some point painted over all the murals and all the mosaics. And so it's all kind of ornamental painting. But that's what I didn't realize. I didn't realize that they just painted over the mosaics, and that behind all of that paint, the mosaics are still there. which is wild. And so we were standing there in the church and looking up towards the apse, and in one of the one of the arches that just before the apse, a huge like paint had fallen, like this huge strip of paint had fallen, and you could see Christ. You could see a mosaic of Christ in the. It was kind of hazy because there was all the white kind of stucco that they'd used to put the paint on top of, but you could still see that it was Christ sitting on a throne. It was surreal, to be honest. It was quite surreal. All right, so Sebastia Colada 6191 asks, if one is deeply rooted in Catholic community with no Orthodox community around, do you still think it's better to become Orthodox? Thank you. I mean, a lot of people, I definitely, this is rough. A lot of people are gonna not like what I'm gonna say, but I would say it's probably better to remain in a place where you have an actual community and an actual, connection, and maybe pray. If you have a sense that you're drawn to Orthodoxy and that you are, that you would love to enter into communion in the Orthodox Church, and maybe that's a prayer that you can have, and it's a prayer that you can keep in your heart. But I would be cautious about leaving your church to theoretically be Orthodox. To be a kind of theoretical Orthodox where you have no access to sacraments, you have no access to community, you have no access to liturgy. This is I think I believe it's spiritually dangerous, and so I would say that's probably the best thing to do is to continue to go to the church you go to, but to simply ask God, that if that an opportunity might come to you, and be surprised. You'd be surprised that God answers prayers. All right. So Nick Hodler 3913 says, from your perspective, why Christianity rather than one meaningful path among others, and why Jesus? I believe that that the story of Christ is the story of stories. I think that the image of the notion of the infinite origin of all things, which then joins fully with his creation. I don't think that there's a higher story than that. I don't think there's a better one. And it's different from. It's actually different from the avatars. A lot of people say, well, Christianity is just a version of the different avatars of Vishnu, let's say. But it's very different because it's not like a projection, right? It's actually a deep unity. There's a sense in which the way in which Christ is united with humanity, the way that God unites with humanity in Christ, is the way in which humanity is also brought into God. And it is in some ways a revelation and a fullness of creation that then becomes a full participation in the life of God. And so I don't see how there could be a bigger and better story than that. And so that's really what I think. I think the incarnation brings together so many of the threads that appear in ancient mythologies and in other cultures, and that's why often people imagine that Christianity was imposed on all these people, but often in the case of the Gauls, in the case of the Celts, and all of these people in Western Europe, for example, that when they heard the story of Christ, they recognized it because they saw that it was in some ways a kind of fulfillment not only of the Old Testament story, but that it was something that resonated deeply within their own story. So, yes, that's what I think. Yeah, there's interesting, some Greek guy, which I can't read his name because I can't read Greek, says, God is dead, we killed him. The deicide is totally justified. You know, that's an interesting idea, huh? The question is, what is the motivation? Where does the motivation to kill God come from? I think that's a good question. If you identify that motivation, you can ask yourself what the nature of that motivation is and whether or not that motivation can serve as a sufficient God for you. You know, the killing of God, that is the idea of revolution as a sufficient model for reality, right? The idea of upending the hierarchy in which we exist. You know, it's not like Nietzsche invented it. You know, it's not like the 19th century scientists were completely innovative in their thinking. Dude, it's there in the theogony. It's there in Hesiod's theogony. That is the castration of the father, right? The killing of the primordial, it's already there. The revolutionary act is there, right in the mythology. It's present, and the difference is that the ancients, they saw the result of the revolution and they saw what it would give. And the result of the revolution against the God, we are living with it now. We lived with it in the 20th century. The 20th century is exactly what you would expect from killing God. And so you would wish that you had at least the humility of Nietzsche to understand that you now have to live with that blood on your hands, and that there's no water that can wash the blood of the supposed killing of God, and that you have to live now in a river of blood for a very long time because of that. Yeah. So someone asked, have you read anything by Guy Gabriel Kay? No, I don't know who that is. Someone asks a question. This is actually my people in my own inner chat here saying, Byron Heim asked who would win a fight between Santa and the Easter Bunny. I'm pretty sure that's Santa. I don't even think you should be asking that question. Like, what is the Easter Bunny? Come on, the Easter Bunny is pretty low on the hierarchy of these kind of festal figures. It's like, what does the Easter Bunny even do? I mean, Santa Claus is everywhere. Like, and nobody, you get a little bit of Easter Bunny around Easter, but Santa Claus is a pretty powerful image. People in the chat, boo, Easter Bunny sucks. Oh, mercy. That's hilarious. All right. Symbolism of the Tooth Fairy. Tooth Fairy is stronger than Easter Bunny. Yeah, I've done a video on the symbolism of the Tooth Fairy. You know that. All right, so maybe I'm going to ask one last question from the circle community, and then maybe one last question from the chat, and then we'll be. I think we'll be done. This is actually kind of fun. I hadn't done this in years because it used to get really crazy. I think I've actually answered all the questions in the Q&A. So maybe one last question then from the. So Lotus Island says, Jonathan Pedro, you skated much this year. Did you see Chris Jocelyn's The Flip of El Toro? Didn't expect it to make me emotional. No, I haven't seen that. And you're just calling me out, man, because I did not skateboard this year. And I hate the fact of that I didn't skateboard. I always wanted to, and then I would travel, and then, it got cold really fast this year. And by November, it was already snowing. And so I just never got to it, and I was kind of gone all summer, and so I have no excuses. I'm making excuses, but I should skateboard next summer. Definitely there will be some skateboarding. All right. All right, so last question from the Q&A. Let's do this last super chat, and then we will be done. Scuba15 asks, Jonathan, do you think the following metaphor is dangerous? A snake in a dream is not a snake. Its identity is fulfilled by its purpose according to the author of the dream. The same is true in life. I'm not sure I understand your question, Scuba. The identity is fulfilled by its purpose according to the author of the dream. The same is true in life. I don't know what you mean by the same is true in life. And so, are you saying that a snake is not a snake in life? And so, I mean, both of them are aspects of a snake, for sure. If you encounter a snake in the world, if you have a snake in your dream, they're both aspects of the snake in their proper context. Obviously, dreams are different from, embodied reality. But if you see a snake in your dream, it's a snake in your dream. If you see a snake in your yard, then it's a snake in your yard. If you see a snake on TV, then it's a snake on TV. So yes, I don't totally understand the question. I'm sorry. I should probably be more. Maybe I'm not subtle enough, but it's also because I've been speaking for an hour and a half, and I usually get tired pretty fast. And so, thanks everybody for showing up. Yeah, we had 2,000 people show up on this live chat. That's pretty wild. I don't think that's, even when we were doing the Q&As before, years ago, we didn't have that many people. And so maybe we could do this once in a while. Could be fun. Hopefully the moderators weren't going crazy trying to follow that. It seemed like it was fine. I wish all of you a Merry Christmas and that you celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and that you have a great time with your family, that you see it as a time of communion and of remembering and of celebration. So thanks, everybody. And yes, I will see you hopefully some other time. Bye-bye.